Part 2 of Chapter 3 of Bootlace Magician, Terpsichore. When Micah arrived at the menagerie, he found it as bright and busy as ever. The daytime animals were all out and enjoying the company of dozens of jubilant children. A little boy was riding the two-headed camel. A trio of girls were running their fingers over a llama's glittery golden wool. And Big Jean the elephant was at her chalkboard, writing trivia questions for a competitive group of teenagers. The sawdust was dry, and fish swam peacefully around his aquarium, which was filled to the rim. It looked like last night had never happened. Micah spent a couple of minutes trying to spot the manager in the crowd, but then he heard a happy chuffing sound beside him. He squinted, and sure enough, he spied paw prints the size of frisbees in the sawdust. "Hi, Bibby," he said. "Long time no see." Micah thought this was a funny joke, but it was hard to tell if the invisible tiger agreed. He stuffed his hands into his pockets and leaned toward Bibby's footprints. "Chintzy said Mr. Head wanted to talk to me. He's not mad, right?" The light bender had said the manager wouldn't be, and Micah knew his guardian wouldn't lie to him, but he couldn't help feeling a little nervous when Bibby snorted and the sawdust shifted. New paw prints appeared, heading across the menagerie. Micah followed the trail, waving at Fish as he passed the aquarium. Fish whacked the glass with his tail. Definitely a friendly gesture, Micah decided, feeling pleased. He was surprised when Bibby's footprints led him to the seam that hid Terpsichore's private paddock. Terpsichore was the only unicorn at Circus Mirandus, a sweet, aqua-colored foal. Micah knew everyone, especially Mr. Head, was worried about her. She had been found wandering the circus's meadow a couple weeks before Micah arrived, and she was too young to be away from her mother. Sometimes the foal refused to eat, and she wasn't growing as she should. "Am I supposed to go in there?" Micah asked Bibby uncertainly. He'd never been invited before. A second later, the seam opened and Mirandus Head himself stepped out. He snapped the fabric shut behind him. "Ah," he said, nodding to Micah. "I see Chintzy is more reliable than I thought. Hello, Micah Tuttle." Micah swallowed. "Hello, Mr. Head." The manager of Circus Mirandus looked a little like a military version of Santa Claus. His white hair was cropped short, and when his sleeves were rolled up for work, as they were now, you could see the compass rose tattooed on one of his muscular biceps. Mr. Head was always kind to Micah when their paths crossed, but it was hard to forget that he hadn't been eager to let Micah live at the circus. "I'm sorry about Fish." Micah tried to keep his spine straight in case good posture mattered to the manager. "I shouldn't have given him the knot without asking you if it was all right." Mr. Head reached down and stroked Bibby's head. It looked like he was petting a particularly firm patch of air. "That would have been best," he said, "but it was all right, and no harm was done." "I thought I'd poisoned him," Micah admitted. He expected Mr. Head to say that such a thing was impossible. Instead, the most peculiar expression crossed his face. It was like he was looking right at Micah, only deeper, as if he could see beyond skin and blood and bone to something else. The look lasted for less than a moment, but Micah could feel it, like a layer of frost against his skin, the cold sinking in further than it should have been. Then the feeling passed. "No, Micah Tuttle," the manager said. "You are not the kind of person who can poison an idea." Micah wasn't sure what to say to that. The manager acted as if nothing unusual had happened. "Your guardian and I had a talk about you this morning." Micah tried not to look alarmed. "You've been traveling with us for long enough now to settle in, and we both think you're ready for some new responsibilities." "Of course," Micah said at once. "I've been practicing my knots every day." "I'm glad you're eager," said the manager, "but the chore the light bender has volunteered you for doesn't involve knots." "I'll do anything," Micah said earnestly. "I like enthusiasm in a young magician," Mr. Head smiled. "Follow me." Terpschore's paddock was one of the most beautiful places Micah had ever seen. It was pleasantly warm, with springy emerald green grass underfoot and piles of sweet-smelling hay in every corner. The tent ceiling was transparent so that the midday sun shone down into the room, the light mingling with the soft glow coming from the walls themselves. Music played, but it wasn't the song Micah usually associated with Circus Miranda's. This was classical music instead of pipes and drums, all fluting and tinkling and merry little trills. The music dissolved Micah's worries in an instant. For a few blissful seconds, he forgot that he was trying to prove himself to Mr. Head. He could just lie down in the soft grass and sleep. A furious trumpeting sound blasted through the music, and Micah looked across the paddock to see an angry baby unicorn charging toward him. Yikes! Terpsichore might have been small, but in that moment she didn't look anything like a sickly, motherless infant. Her head was lowered, and her stubby horn gleamed in the sunlight. He froze. The unicorn speared him. A strong hand grabbed Micah by the elbow and yanked him out of the way. "Mr. Head," said Micah, "what's going on?" The manager ignored him and called out in a cheerful voice to someone across the paddock. "You seem to have lost control of her." Terpsichore ran right into a wall of tent fabric. It stretched, then bounced back like a trampoline, sending the aqua-colored foal reeling. She was unharmed, but obviously enraged, and she plunged forward again, jabbing at the fabric with her horn. "She disapproved of my attempts to alter her mind," said the light bender. Micah had been so focused on the unicorn that he hadn't realized his guardian was here too. The light bender stood with his back pressed against the opposite wall of the paddock. His leather coat didn't seem to have any new scuffs or scratches, but his hair looked even more like a scrambled bird's nest than normal. "I've barely managed to conceal myself from her." The illusionist had an unusual note of frustration in his voice. "That's because she's a clever young lady." Mr. Head smiled proudly at the unicorn. Micah inched himself behind the manager. The clever young lady was making sharp whistling noises and attacking the tent fabric as if it were her most hated enemy. "I fear she is more ill-tempered than clever," the lightbender replied, "but Micah can handle her." "Me?" said Micah, wondering what he had done to give his guardian the impression that he was some kind of expert unicorn wrangler. The manager pulled him forward and clapped him on the shoulder. "It was good of you to agree to help." "Noble, even," the lightbender murmured. He hadn't moved away from the wall, and he had a distant look in his eyes that made Micah think he was still trying to use his magic on the foal. "Micah, just walk over to Terpsichore and offer to pet her." "What? No!" "Unicorns like children," the lightbender said. "They do," Mr. Head agreed, "and they are herd animals. Perhaps what Terpsichore needs is a friend." Suddenly, Micah understood how he had ended up in this position. He'd been trying to make friends with a fish last night. No doubt the lightbender thought he could do with another animal pal. "Are you serious?" "Of course," said Mr. Head. "At the moment," said the lightbender. "She needs to eat." "She needs to eat. See if you can persuade her to take a few bites of this." Mr. Head steered Micah toward a wooden bucket that lay on its side a few feet away. The bucket's contents had spilled, and a mass of something that looked like half-melted yellow marshmallows covered the grass. Mr. Head scooped a double handful of the food into the bucket and passed it to Micah. Then he pursed his lips and whistled an elaborate tune. Terpsichore stopped jousting with the wall. She tilted her head. Mr. Head whistled again, and before Micah could say, "Are you sure about this?" the foal rounded on him.